Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beef Banter, the podcast where we on the beef team dig into the real issues shaping the beef industry, from markets to meat quality to policy, production, and beyond. Nothing's off the table. I'm Sarah Muirhead, and here with me today are Clint Peck and Nevil Speer. And welcome to you both. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Sarah.
Always fun to be here.
Yeah.
So let's start, as we like to do, with a look at the cattle market. There's a lot of interesting dynamics that are taking place, and I know, Nevil, you follow this on a regular basis. You do too, Clint, but I know, Nevil, you're really into it. So talk to us a little bit about those dynamics. What's at play right now when we look at the cattle market?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's unbelievable, right? I mean, we're going to get USDA numbers here through Friday and here in the next couple of hours. And, our Fed market last week's it's going to finish $230 somewhere in there, right? A little bit below, maybe a little bit above, but we were right there knocking on the door Friday. That's almost $40 better than a year ago. And, we were just talking right ahead of this, but we're doing that on bigger volume, right? We have bigger fed beef production this year, just slightly than last year. And demand just continues to be amazing. Last week's choice cutout was $360. That's the best price we've seen, except for a couple of weeks during COVID. So in the middle of all of this kind of economic uncertainty and all the stuff that we hear about and all the noise in the news, consumers are buying beef, and it's really a remarkable story. And those prices get, no pun intended, fed back up into the supply chain. Yeah.
And then there's carcass weights, right?
Yeah, it's just amazing, right? We're like this week, we're 20 pounds ahead of a year ago. And so while numbers are down a little bit, right, in terms of inventory, we've compensated for that in terms of carcass weight. Obviously, there's an upper limit that's going to at some point come to an end. And then we're going to start getting into tighter numbers too, right? We're going to run out of, cattle supplies are going to get tight. And then then what happens? Then it really gets crazy. So, where do we go? I don't know. It's unprecedented. By the way, the thing that I love to track is the market finally turned in March of 21. Okay. And I've written about this a couple of times, but we have now gone 220 weeks or 4 years and 3 months. Only 4 weeks out of that time has the market been below a year ago. So we just continue to stair step up and up and up week after week. And look, we're all old enough. We can say it. We've never seen anything like this before in our business. It's just completely unprecedented. It's amazing.
Any indication if there's, that end point or what we might be looking at there?
So obviously, we talk about, right, weights are, at some point have to kind of flatten out, right? We're going to bump up against kind of biological limits, though we've been saying that for 30 years, right? And numbers are going to get tighter. So margins are tough for the packer. At some point, it's going to get tough for the retailer too, to pass along higher prices. So then you really get into this tug of war, and that's when I think it gets interesting.
One of the things I'm seeing out there, the proliferation of these branded beef programs.
Oh yeah,
ranch beef programs. Up in my neck of the woods up here in Montana, I can probably throw a dart at the map and hit an area where ranchers have a branded beef from basically gene to fork, and they're selling beef into the markets. They're selling a lot of it direct. Mm-hmm. Bypassing the retailers, they use local processing plants, and they're doing a great job of it. And I wouldn't maybe have said this 3 or 4 years ago, but part of it, they're great consistency, great consistency of supply, and these guys with these branded programs, they're doing a great job.
Yeah,
and people are taking advantage of that.
People are clamoring for good product, right?
They are.
And they're willing to
pay. Identity.
Yeah. That's what's amazing. Yeah.
Right.
And again, look, we all kind of remember growing up, and coming of age in the 90s, right? Remember beef was terrible and you should only buy chicken and right. We struggled with markets and all of that. It's an incredible turnaround.
Well, yeah. And beef at one time was a staple on the dinner table. And I talked about that in a recent column. Beef at the end of the day, today is a luxury item. And, like I said in that article, you don't take your hot date out for chicken wings. You go to a steakhouse. Okay. If you want to impress somebody, if you got a client or whatever, if you've got family members,
yeah,
you put a steak on the grill. You like last night at my place, I put a tri-tip on the grill that just absolutely blew the whole people away, everybody away. And,
but also, don't forget our favorite product of all, the hamburger.
And then there's ham.
Oh yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
My final meal, my final meal request would be a hamburger and French fries.
With cheese or without cheese?
No cheese. Don't ruin it. No cheese, no mayo.
Yeah, I agree on that. So now we've been hearing a lot of talk of possible drought in cattle country this going into it here this summer. Any thoughts on that? How that might impact the market, Nevil?
Well, it's when do feeder cattle start coming again right into the fall run? Do we advance the fall run? But I think the bigger issue is just, gosh, we just can't get a break, right? There's a big part of the country that's dry and right, Clint. I mean, there's parts of South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska. You come down in that beef belt, it's pretty dry. And Sarah, I watched your weather podcast the other day, and the outlook doesn't look very good for rain in June, and that gets tough. So the question is, do we start to see? Do cows start coming to town, right? Yep. And then obviously, do we kind of speed up? Feeder cattle, weaning, what have you. And then also as you get into kind of that Four Corners area, my wife's family, they ranch in Delta County, Colorado, and it's terrible. So yeah, there's big pockets that need rain.
Yes. And there's pockets that are getting too much rain too.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. Well, yeah.
And I was just going to jump in there. Back in the 60s, and I can remember the 60s. My dad sitting out on the front porch praying for a rain, and he and my mom, I can remember this so clearly. My mom says, "Yeah, this is just a terrible drought." And my dad said, "Well, it's always dry someplace." And right. We do have pockets then that we have moisture. We have like central Montana right now. I mean, there's times when you can't buy rain for any price, and now they're sitting great. We move 200 miles away east, and it's dry, like you're saying, up in the Dakotas.
Yeah,
but it's always dry someplace. And I often think when we start blaming cattle numbers, cattle cycles on drought, I think we're probably putting too much emphasis on drought with regard to our cattle numbers than maybe we should, because it's always dry someplace.
Actually, Clint, I was just going to ask you that. Don't you think over time, and I would say especially in the last 20 years, and as we've seen some consolidation in the cow-calf sector, that most or a lot more operations are much better at managing through drought than they used to be?
Oh, without question. And we're better at managing water as well.
That's really
using water more effectively. That isn't to take away that when you look out the front door or drive down the road and it's just bone dry and there's no chance of rain. And I mean, it is gut wrenching.
Yeah.
But, for 2/3 of the country, we live in a semi-arid climate.
That's really fair.
And we need to pretty much accept that. But we are doing as an industry an incredible job of drought management, even selecting genetics that do better in the drought areas.
And certainly much more cognizant of the need to store hay and that kind of thing, and
right.
Always kind of ready so you don't make emotional decisions in the middle of tough weather. Yeah.
And that is tough. And those emotional decisions sometimes can can make or break you as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because as soon as you make that emotional decision and ship off a bunch of cows, it starts raining.
Yep.
Right. So I remember doing a column. I don't know, Sarah, like when we used to, I can't remember what we called it. Dr. Cora and I did back and forth for a couple of years, but beef tips, that's what it was. But I remember writing a column about, do you have a plan? No, really, question number 2. No, really, do you have a plan? And the point being is you really do have to have a plan.
And what is your plan?
And stick with it then, right? Yep. Don't react emotionally when it gets really tough. Yeah.
It's always easy to just react and just forget that plan.
For sure.
Great point. So let's talk Australia. I know, Clint, you just penned a column that's should be online today, actually. And you talked about, we know agricultural issues have always been kind of a sticking point when it comes between U.S. and Australia from a trade relations standpoint. Right. And there's been a recent statement made by President Trump claiming that Australia bans U.S. beef. Talk to us about that. Put that into perspective. What's the situation when it comes to Australian beef imports, exports into the U.S.? How's that setting up?
Yeah, Sarah. So that piece that I just filed and should be online today is part of a larger series on global beef production that I've been working on, and a lot of this is research on my part, but it's also based on personal experience of being in these countries. And I think that's the real key of being there, talking to the people, and knowing kind of boots on the ground what's going on. With regard to Australia, I think that really the beef ban thing is so overblown with regard to Australia. I mean, yes, technically beef is not banned. U.S. beef is not banned in Australia. The problem is that the Australians want full traceability, and they with regard to our beef cattle, they do not want any Mexican or Canadian beef intermingled into imports into their country. But they're also doing that in a reciprocity manner with regard to U.S. So the beef that the U.S. imports from Australia, we require full traceability, which, by the way, they as a country do have a nationwide traceability system. I mean, we're talking from farm to fork. They can trace the beef. So the U.S. says, okay, we'll take Australian beef, but we don't want transshipment of animals or beef from other countries that are labeled Australian beef and coming to the U.S. So we're asking them the same thing they're asking of us. Now, that said, if you look at the data, Australia is the 73rd largest importer of beef in the world. That means they almost import no beef, from anybody. They get a little jag here and there from of high quality Wagyu beef from Japan. But really, that's the only beef that Australians import. And for the U.S. cattle industry to get their underwear all in a knot over Australia, I think is barking up the wrong tree, because we're wasting time with Australia when we could be looking at ramping up other markets that really are available and would make a difference. It's like selling seawater to a sailor. I just don't think it's going to happen. It's not worth trying.
Any thoughts, Neville?
Yeah, it's really, at the end of the day, it's kind of a false talking point, right? First of all, it's a really hard market to sell into because of Clint's point, right? And secondly, it's my understanding we actually probably do qualify to import product there, right? Through for example, the NHTC program requires 840 tags. And any cattle that qualified for an NHTC program, my understanding is they would qualify to be,
I believe you're right, Neville,
exported to Australia, because that product is fully traceable through source verification. And the thing that separates NHTC from some of the other source verified programs is that it does require an 840 tag versus, for example, like a 982 all flex tag or whatever, company you want to use there. But the thing is because it's so hard to get into, nobody's really made the effort to go sell U.S. beef in Australia. I mean, that's a pretty heavy lift, right? And so it's a little bit of, well, more than a little bit. It's kind of a false talking point. Yeah. And so again, it's where we get into all this politics, right? And then it gets really messy.
Yeah. Speaking of
we
politics,
still have to remember that our imports from Australia, and we I guess should say this till we're blue in the face, but we import lean beef trimmings that we need from that country, and we sorely need those trimmings. Now, there's ranchers out there that don't believe that. There's cattle feeders that don't believe that. But my challenge to them is, okay, try raising cattle that are for grinding only and see where that gets you economically. Yeah. And it's just not going to happen. So let's just be happy that we can import lean beef trimmings from Australia, add value to those trimmings, fill a consumer demand of hamburger that's out there, and that demand and let the economics lie where they may with regard to who can produce that type of product the cheapest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So speaking of,
we'll get flack over it. I always do, and that's fine. I say these things because I fully believe I can defend my comments.
For sure. Yeah.
So speaking of politics and economics, Neville, you just had a column where you stated that political borders are not indicative of economic relevance. Walk us through that. Elaborate on that for us a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, we start to talk about all these things of trade around, for example, countries or what have you, but those are political borders that were determined a long time ago and actually have no economic significance, right? If you think about how the border of the United States 200 years ago, no one knew that we'd be able to do trade with China or Australia. We'd be trading beef with Australia, right? And so business evolves, but political borders don't. And I think really it invokes the founders who implemented the Commerce Clause. They understood that states, if we made those political borders something of economic relevance, then we would have tariffs around every state, right? And that doesn't indicate that there's a need for trade, because there is, and that's part of what's made the United States able to flourish, is because of the Commerce Clause, and that states were I should actually more accurately say companies or people within those states could do business with people or companies in other states without being penalized. And so if it's true inside the country, it must be true also outside the country. And so, yeah. Remember, I mean, borders are political. Trade is economic, and those two things do not merge in any way necessarily, right? But yet when we
cross the border from Montana into Alberta, you can go talk to those Alberta farmers and ranchers, and they go, you know what? We should just be part of the U.S. We're so much alike. What you all are, and you go down the southern border, and I mean, obviously the whole immigration thing notwithstanding. Those ranchers say, Chihuahua, Sonora, they could very well be part of the U.S. And you wouldn't know the difference. You wouldn't blink an eye.
Well, Clint, like, for example, Callandia, right? I mean, the article that I wrote, recently, and you live in Montana. All your beef, 99% of the beef there is imported from another state.
Yes, that's right. It is.
Right. So wait, but yet that's a political border. Montana is a political border.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So
and we export 90% of our calves.
That's exactly right. Yes, because that's what makes the most sense, right? Back to David Ricardo. I mean, it's just Yeah, trade's really an amazing thing. You know, if you look at the history of the world, human beings trade. They've always traded. That's what we've done. Yeah.
Well,
Now,
and it goes back to the foundation of economics. Do what you do best and trade for the rest.
yeah, that's
There you
exactly
go.
right. Yeah.
So there we
Any
go.
final thoughts you guys want to leave as we we
I
wrap
do
up
want
Beef Banter
a
here
final
today?
thought, and I've got a little handful of cows myself, and I think talk about risk in the cattle business, and I thought about this driving back from the farm yesterday morning. Our biggest risk right now is keeping cattle alive out on our ranches and in the feedlots. Those ranchers that do a good job of getting a live calf on the ground out of that heifer, out of that cow, keeping that calf alive, doing what it takes to get that calf to grow as much as they can. That's the key. But keeping those cattle alive right now is the biggest risk. Anyone in the cattle business, I believe, is the biggest risk they carry.
It's a lot of equity.
A lot of equity.
A lot of equity. Yep. Yep.
So do what you can to keep those calves alive and get them to market so that somebody else can add value to them.
It's good.
Very good. Great discussion here today, guys. And of course, a lot of this you can read in more depth on beefmagazine.com or in our digital edition of Beef. So we look forward to seeing you again real soon. And Clint and Neville, we appreciate you being here on Beef Banter.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
For those of you that are interested, be sure to subscribe to Beef Banter on your favorite podcast channel. Wishing you all a great day and thank you for listening.